Hey everyone, and welcome back. My name is Mackenzie, aka Astromac, and I'm a professional astrologer, and I'm here to talk all things astrology with you. Today, I want to talk all about the full moon in Capricorn happening on July 10th at 3:36 p.m. Central Time at 18 degrees and 50 minutes of Capricorn. This is a great moment to do some reflection and reflecting on things like, responsibility and discipline and hard work and our long-term goals and our own inner authority. So if you've been feeling that pressure to almost get your shit together, or you've been feeling like it's time for a big decision, well, you're probably feeling this astrology. So before we get too far, let's pull up the chart and dive right into what we can expect with this full moon. So, like I said earlier, this full moon is happening on July 10th at 3:36 a.m. Central Time at 18 degrees of Capricorn. As you can see down here, this is the moon, and it's sitting directly opposite the sun. That's what a full moon is when the sun and moon are sitting directly opposite each other, and the sun is able to fully illuminate the moon. That's why full moons are associated with things being illuminated and revealed, and it's also a time of past manifestations coming to fruition. And it's also a really powerful time of release, and so we might be feeling more emotional on or around this full moon, just because it tends to bring up those emotions more readily. More than anything, though, I tend to associate full moons with a time of release and letting go of those things that no longer serve us, in order to make room for the things that do serve us later down the line. And so because this full moon is happening in Capricorn, it's kind of bringing a more serious, also more grounded quality that's kind of asking us to zoom out a little bit and kind of take stock of the things that we've built in our lives. And Capricorn energy is known for its more serious nature. It's ruled by Saturn, that planet of hard work, responsibility, discipline, authority, all those things. And Capricorn is the goat or the sea goat. And so it's kind of we're all on our own journey up our own individual mountain. And, it takes hard work and discipline and patience to be able to climb up that mountain. Keep in mind, though, that we're still in these emotional and sensitive waters of Cancer season. So under the light of this full moon, kind of use it as a time of reflection, reflecting on your past experiences and using your past experiences as a way to kind of fuel your journey forward. I tend to associate new moons as a time for reflection, but full moons are also a great time for reflection as well. And especially with this one, because we're in Cancer season, and Cancer has to do with our past and our memories. So if you're in my Patreon, then you may or may not have already read this, but I was reflecting on this full moon and looking at this chart, and it just got me thinking about how we're all on our own individual journeys, and we're all on our own individual trek up our own mountains, whatever it might be, climbing our way up to whatever we're wanting to accomplish or achieve in our lives. Especially since the new moon in Capricorn that happened on December 30th of 2024. And under the light of this full moon, I kept getting this visual of we've reached some kind of peak in a mountain, and it's not it's necessarily the top peak, the ultimate peak, but maybe for some of us it is, but it's kind of we've reached some kind of pinnacle, and we're getting this opportunity to reflect back over the things that we've accomplished or the things that we've achieved over the last 6 months, and we're kind of given this opportunity to reflect on what worked and reflect on what didn't and what went well, and, what could we maybe work on better. Reflect on the things that you've been able to manifest in your life and use that as a way to kind of give yourself evidence that you do have that power to manifest things into your life. And also reflecting on the lessons that you've learned over the last 6 months, and did you learn things the easy way or did you learn things the hard way, and what kind of lessons have you learned, and have you integrated those lessons as well? Because when we're able to integrate and learn from these lessons, that's what turns into wisdom. And so again, just kind of imagine yourself standing on top of this higher place on a mountain. You can be at the ultimate mountaintop if you want, but we're kind of just at this higher place where we're given this vantage point where we're seeing things a little more clearly. Full moons illuminate, and this is kind of imagine that you're outside at night during a full moon. We see things a little more clearly, and the ruler of this full moon being Saturn is also sextile Uranus, that is newly in Gemini, and so we're kind of, it's there's also a lightning bolt. So we're getting these flashes of clarity while we're standing on top of this little mountaintop. So we're given like this little moment of clarity where we can see what's been working for us over the last 6 months and, what's up for release. Like on your journey up this mountain, did you maybe like pack too much or pack too heavy? And, are there tools that you didn't need that you can kind of release and leave behind? Like what were those things that kind of like slowed you down or may have even hindered your progress altogether? And then also reflect on like what helped you to get to where you are and who helped you to get to where you are, because those are also very important things, and those are the things that you want to hold on to. Or did you set like too high of expectations for yourself, or have you been too hard on yourself, or are these goals just like unattainable now? Or do you even want these same things? Do you even want to climb this mountain anymore? It's just a great time to reassess all of these things and reflect on, where you're wanting to go from here, and also release those things that are holding you back or hindering your progress in any way. Also, just pay attention to your emotions and your feelings as well, because those are big clues, like where are you feeling called towards more and more, and what are you feeling pulled away from more and more? And again, be honest with yourself about what's needing to be released from your life. Again, with Capricorn energy, we have to take responsibility for ourselves and take accountability, and each one of us is responsible for our own lives. So it's kind of like, you got to be the one to be honest with yourself. So really kind of reflect on and think about where you can take responsibility for where you're wanting to go next. And also keep in mind that there's no like shame or judgment here. We're all humans just trying our best, and things have been really difficult lately if you're paying attention to what's going on in the world and the United States. And, it's really heavy and it's a lot to, take in and also like process at the same time, paired with what we're all individually going through on a very personal level in our personal lives. So, give yourself a lot of grace and compassion and love with this as well. There is a certain amount of like ownership though with this full moon, and just taking responsibility for ourselves and being our own authority. And, we each get to choose where we put our energy and our attention. And so, just keep in mind that we're responsible for that as well. And Capricorn energy, it keeps it real, it's like that sign that is like reality checks kind of. And so, yeah, just keep it real with yourself. And, keep in mind, we're still in Cancer season. I know I've said it a few times now, but, this is the season of nurturing ourselves and taking care of ourselves and honoring how we feel and honoring our emotions and tending to our most like basic needs. And that's something that we are each individually responsible for in our own lives. Because, how productive can you be if you're, exhausted, or you're not taking good care of yourself and you're just burnt out all the time, And so, yes, making space to like work hard, but also rest and play and have fun. And so under the light of this full moon, really, use this as an opportunity to take stock of your life, particularly in the house that has 18 degrees of Capricorn. And I know it's not like fun to think about like, hard work and responsibility and discipline, especially if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, we're in summer season. So, I think it is easy to sometimes kind of like overlook responsibility or pass off responsibility to someone else, and like, sometimes even project and be like, they should be the one being responsible. And it's like, actually, no, I do. Like, that's a me thing. It's not like fun to take responsibility. But when you think about it, like when you do finally like reach a point like where you are ready to take responsibility for, whatever it is, like whether it's like taking responsibility for what your life is now, like a really, really powerful shift happens. And once you do reach that moment, it's a really powerful time, and it really puts the power back into your own hands. If you're anything like me, sometimes you just reach a certain point where it's like you're just sick of repeating the same patterns all the time, or you're sick of like feeling sorry for yourself, or you get sick of, just like, again, repeating patterns and even just feeling like stuck and stagnant in life. And, again, no judgment, because there is a time and a place for all of those things, like maybe you've recently undergone like a huge change, or, you've gone through something really difficult. And so you're just letting your nervous system kind of like settle back down and come back to neutral. But then eventually you do reach a point, and you'll know when you're at that point. It's not like it's like, 5 minutes later or anything. It's usually takes a certain amount of time. That's different for everybody, depending on each individual situation. But, once you do reach that point, it's kind of like, something's got to change. And it usually starts with the self, and it starts with taking accountability for, what your life is, and taking accountability for your actions and what you do from that space. And what you do from there is what matters the most, honestly. Like, personal example, I was kind of stuck in this like self-pity zone for a very long time, and that shit got old. It got very old. And I stopped feeling sorry for myself, and I started taking accountability for, what do I do with the cards that I've been dealt in this life, and how can I take responsibility now moving forward. And, a huge shift in my life did happen after that, and I don't think I would be where I am had I not started with taking accountability and responsibility for myself. So yeah, just some things to like think about and reflect on for this full moon. But again, don't be hard on yourself, and try to approach things giving yourself a lot of love and grace and compassion, because it's hard out there right now. But also keep in mind that sometimes the most loving thing that you can do for yourself is owning your shit and taking responsibility for your life and taking responsibility for what you do next. And of course, this full moon is going to be impacting everyone very differently. So, it could be in terms of your career, or it could be school, or, it could be relationships or creative projects, or, your family, or it could be like a inner self-work type of thing. But yeah, and I do think that we'll all be feeling this full moon probably a little heavier, because the ruler of this full moon being Saturn stations retrograde just a couple of days after this full moon is exact. And when a planet is stationary, it just feels like, it's like an exclamation point, like it's just like a really strong point in any chart. And when Saturn is retrograde, it's a time of reassessing all things Saturnian. So that includes our responsibilities and our boundaries, and also those long-term goals that we have for ourselves. And it's also a time of reflecting on some of those lessons that we've learned since Saturn's been moving direct since, I think, November of 2024. So really reflecting on like some of those lessons that we've learned, because Saturn teaches us lessons, sometimes not in so subtle ways, Sometimes we do have to learn things the hard way, depending on our own unique charts and how we individually learn lessons. And, do you have to touch the stove to learn that it's hot, and to learn to never touch it again? Because that would be me. So even like reflecting on some of those more difficult things that we've had to go through over the last several months. And then, really taking time to reflect on the lessons that you've learned through going through those difficult times, because, at least for me, it is those difficult times that I tend to learn the most about myself, and learn the most about like what I want from life and what I don't want as well. And then taking some time to kind of integrate those lessons and learn from those lessons, because when we, integrate and learn from those lessons and apply them to our lives, again, that's what turns into wisdom. We gain wisdom through learning through these past experiences and lessons and mistakes. Mistakes are a huge part of learning lessons, and I think in society we're so afraid of making mistakes. So again, don't be afraid to make some mistakes, and just make sure you learn from them though. So if it feels like with this full moon, like you've got some old patterns, or some old people or relationships, or even old projects that are like coming up again, it's just because they're up for review, and Saturn might be coming in and saying like, did you learn your lesson the first time, or the second, third, fourth, And again, no judgment if you do find yourself repeating a pattern or anything, we're only human, but do try to keep in mind that the power is in the noticing. And so if you notice that an old pattern is coming up, or if you're repeating an old pattern, or, an old relationship comes back around, take note of that. Because then once you do notice it, then that's when you can move differently and make different decisions than you have in the past. And this full moon is also trine the planet Mars that is in Virgo. So we're being asked to be like super intentional with, how we move under this full moon. Mars tends to energize whatever it touches. And so when it's energizing a full moon, that might make us feel a little more emotionally reactive than we normally are. But because it's in Virgo, I kind of view it as bringing more of like a refining quality to our long-term goals, kind of like we're pruning things and releasing what no longer aligns with where we're wanting to go. Again, full moons are always a time of release. And so with this trine to Mars, I kind of view it as we're like cutting away and simplifying our goals, but doing so in a way that is productive and intentional, and in a way that still honors our truth and honors our own like path and individual alignment, really. And then again, the ruler of this full moon being Saturn and having its sextile Uranus that is newly in Gemini, I really view this as a way of kind of like bridging the old with the new and tradition with reinvention and innovation. Personally, I really view this as a time where we can break through some of our own limitations and, collectively, I don't really know what to expect, but I think that it'll be a big day in the news. Now, let's talk about some ways to work with this full moon energy. As always, you know me, I love journaling, and so you could journal your way through this and kind of reflecting on your goals that you have, whether it's, past goals that you've outgrown or, goals that you want to go after now. Reflecting on like, where are you being called to level up more and take on more responsibility? Not so much out of like being hard on yourself and, that added pressure, but more so like this inner calling and like this feeling of like, I'm meant to be doing this, What do you find yourself kind of working towards and striving towards, and is it still aligned? Like, do you find yourself wanting to keep climbing up that mountain, or are you ready for a new mountain? Why do you even want to climb this particular mountain? Like, really kind of reflect on your why, the purpose of why you're striving towards this thing. Are your current routines kind of supporting your future vision, or are they hindering you in some way? What lessons have you learned since the start of the year, and have you integrated them, and have you actually learned from them, or are you continually repeating patterns? Also kind of reflect on your relationship to time and discipline and responsibility and, your own personal authority. Because, those things mean very different things to each individual person. So kind of reflecting on those things and just taking stock of, like your own personal feels with those. The next thing you can do with this full moon energy is make sure you're nurturing yourself and taking good care of yourself and honoring yourself and honoring how you're feeling and honoring your emotions. Try not to be so hard on yourself and don't push yourself to like build something if you're feeling really tired and burnt out, You gotta like take good care of yourself and treat yourself as if you're somebody that you love and care about. We're still in the middle of Cancer season, and Cancer season is that time of slowing down and resting when we need to and taking that time to fill up our own cup and honoring our sensitivities and, just going gentle on ourselves. So cry if you need to, or have yourself a quick little temper tantrum if you need to. That's also very like Cancerian. Or maybe it's like taking a salt bath and, just honoring yourself that way. Or it could be just like taking some time for yourself and being very intentional that way. However you choose to spend this full moon is right for you. I think when we think about like Capricorn energy, we think about like hard work and, like that boss bitch energy. But a huge part of productivity is allowing ourselves that time and space to rest and take good care of ourselves and also have fun and play and have time for our hobbies, So just keep that in mind if you're anything like me and you're letting yourself have like a rest day and you have like that little voice in the back of your head saying like, oh, you should be doing this and this and this. Like, no, we need time to just allow ourselves to decompress and rest. The next thing you can do is release, It's a full moon, and so it's always a time of release and letting go of those things that no longer serve us. And so, again, reflect back over the last like 6 months and the things that helped you to get to where you are, and also reflect on those things that kind of hindered you or held you back, and ask yourself if you're ready to release those things. And then also reflect on like some of those long-term goals you have, you know, do you still want those, or are some of those up for release, or maybe you set too high of expectations and so it's releasing those expectations. And then also reflecting on like your list of responsibilities and reflecting on, you know, are each one of those still necessary to be responsible for? Sometimes we outgrow certain responsibilities and that's okay, and so you can release those as well. And so you could do like a whole releasing ceremony under this full moon where you kind of write down those old goals or those old responsibilities that you've outgrown or that are no longer aligned. And you could like burn that piece of paper, or, you know, rip it up and throw it away, or you could even bury it. You know, each person like has their own rituals that they do. So whatever feels right to you, and listen to your own intuition. The next thing you could do is you could do some kind of like grounding ritual. You know, Capricorn is a very earthy, grounded sign, and with that trine to the Virgo Mars, grounding ourselves is going to be super important, especially because with Uranus newly in Gemini, I think we're probably all like feeling a little more buzzy than usual. So again, that could be like, you know, taking a nice salt bath that's like soothing and calming and grounding. And you could like also just get outside into nature and get your feet on the earth, or you could hug a tree. You know, that's a great way to kind of immediately ground yourself. Or you could do that grounding exercise that's like, you know, name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can taste, I'm forgetting, 1 thing that you can smell. You know, I don't know if like that's the order you're supposed to do it in, but you know, just kind of paying attention to your environment and getting yourself fully embodied and bringing yourself back to the present moment. Now remember, full moons are all about things being illuminated and revealed, and it's also a time of release. So if something ends around this time, just trust that it's making space for something that is more aligned for you in your future. Capricorn energy really, it keeps it real, and it doesn't mess around. But it does kind of like support us and guide us in ways of trying to make us stronger and more aligned with our own authority. And in that process, we become more wise and just more self-assured, I think. And it really wants us to like stand in our truth, even if that means like we need a little more discipline or patience and climbing up that mountain a little bit slower, or even just like standing more solidly in who we are. Also remember that you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to have it all figured out right now. But when you are in your own personal authority and you're taking responsibility and you're taking accountability, you know, that really again puts that power back in your own hands. And with that power, it's kind of like you're able to choose what you do with that power and choose what you do next, really. So under the light of this full moon, be sure to choose and release with intention. If this video resonated with you at all, or it helped in any way, be sure to give it a like and subscribe and comment what you're releasing under this full moon. And if you want a deeper dive into how this lunation could be impacting you, I do offer mini readings. The link is down below. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. So until next time, love you, bye!